Test. Hello.
Tiffany can hear you. She just waved. Yeah.
No, I didn't, unless you can.
Well, no,
How about now? Hello?
she's nodding yes.
She can hear.
Gonna mute you. Is this you? Or who?
That's me right there.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
Gonna
Yeah.
mute you.
I just did it so I could use the chat.
Can you
You
just-
can't.
Oh, she's not connected to audio at all. So that's why it's not giving
Yeah,
you that
I'm
audio.
not on any of the thing you're on.
Yeah, so you use.
I just went in through the app.
Right, awesome. So you use Wova to chat, like if there's any question, you go through.
So I should just keep this up to use
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Yeah, so if you use this, you could just pin it to your screen. When you start for Q&A, I'll just.
Okay.
Great, thank you so much.
Good thing I wore a higher neck thing. Okay. My timer, so I know I'm not going too long.
And then there's a projector out here. So your microphone doesn't project out.
Yeah, okay. Just for that. Oh, we have one more person. Okay. Cool. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi. Hello. So I am Emily Boza. We're going to just go in order of what's in the program. So I'm going to start us out, then we'll go to Tiffany and then Lacey. We're each going to take about 15 to 20 minutes just presenting, and then we're going to take all questions at the end so we make sure we're not spending too much on any person before we get there. So like I said, I'm Emily Boza. I'm here from UW-Madison. I am currently working on my dissertation. So I am going to go through a lot really quick because I realize this is chapter 4 of my dissertation and it doesn't really make sense without some of chapter 2 and 3. So I'm more than happy to go back to some of this during questions if people want to know more. But I will be kind of zooming through some of this. Let's cut off a little bit. Cool. All right. So I am testing out basically, like the title says, a new model of how to do writing across curriculum, starting with the idea of how can we center social justice issues through everything we're doing. I think a lot of time it's like, oh, can we put it on top of, but because I could do this from my dissertation, start from the beginning, I wanted to see what it would look like to center that right from the beginning. So that's my big goal 1. And then goal 2 was to make structural change across campus. So if we're doing that kind of change, I didn't want to just change one professor to do something cool. I wanted to think, what would a model look like where you're really changing a bigger part of campus doing that? So starting with that idea of bigger change on campus, I think a lot of us have known about this, so I'll do this super quickly, but if not, let me know if you have questions. But I think a really great model of that is vertical integration, or the departmental model, writing enriched curriculum. They really, like a lot of WAC, look at thinking of writing as a mode of learning across all curriculum, and also writing as a scaffolded skill. And so Pamela Flash and Chris Anson have a whole book out about how they've done this, and a lot of other schools have started to pick it up. But basically, they go and work with entire departments at a time, starting discussions during faculty meetings. And eventually this leads to kind of a grassroots development of a departmental writing plan. So it's not just one professor changing one thing in a course, it's coming together, talking about what they believe about writing for their students in their discipline, and making a plan of how to scaffold that throughout their curriculum. The social and linguistic justice side of it. So there's a lot of critiques about WAC being more assimilationist in nature. So people have started to work against that, bringing in things like critical race theory, ratiolinguistics, thinking about how to bring in Black and Hispanic dialects of English that are often prohibited in academia. So I have a few people you can look into there if you want. Also, a lot of people have looked into additional support for multilingual students. But I really like this kind of is where I'm drawing a lot of what I want to do more with social justice work in WAC. LaCourte, 1996, said that WAC needs to address the acculturation of students into already normalized discourses, the reproduction of dominant ideologies that these discourses support, and the silencing of difference, particularly cultural, socioeconomic, and gender differences, as well as alternative literacies and other ways of knowing. So to me, this means more than just like offering additional services to specific types of students. This is a bigger structural change for campuses to happen, where we're really thinking, how can we change those discourses and the disciplines themselves to not silence difference, to kind of bring difference into the forefront of what they're doing. So one model I drew from a lot for this side of thinking is writing across communities. Hopefully a few of you have heard about that too, from Michelle Kells. She has been doing this at the University of New Mexico. And it really foregrounds language diversity beyond just academic spheres. It really draws in the community. So her work, especially, they're a Hispanic serving institution, and they have a very high indigenous population. So that's communities that she's really focusing on at her university. But obviously, whatever campus you're on, it would be the communities around you that you would work with. It guides students towards critically responsive approaches. It's bringing in their own cultural and symbolic systems. When she did this on her campus, it involved a lot of data collection from on-campus and off-campus community members, faculty, staff, and students all came together to talk about what this would look like to really write from their communities and bring that into campus spaces. And then from those discussions, she has created programs, centers, and events that celebrate cultural and linguistic diversity. So as I'm bringing the two together, I started to think, what really could you see as similarities? Because they're kind of different approaches. And when I wanted to do kind of both of those things, I saw the main thing that brought them together is the idea of seeing WAC as a grassroots movement. So writing across communities has been referred to as a grassroots or social activist movement. So a lot of it's really going out to the community, going to students, kind of doing some of that bottom up activist work to create change on campus. Writing enriched curriculum has also been described as a grassroots approach, especially the way that it's going to the faculty themselves to build up a bigger curriculum and change in the department. And so to do both of that, what I really saw was both models require building trust, a lot of collaboration, both with faculty, but other parties on campus. Writing enriched curriculum doesn't do it as much, but you do see them gather data from community stakeholders, some from students, things like that in some versions of it. And they both really focus on creating shared goals. So my project, My big research question was basically, I thought the way to do this then is I wanted to look at departments as communities. So what would it look like to engage with units on campus as existing communities in the manner of community engaged research? To do that, 4 steps that are slightly cut off, I think they're actually pretty good there. First, I reached out to possible partners on campus. So I wanted to find one department to kind of test this out with for my dissertation. Then chose which partner was the best to work with, and I entered the community. That's a term from community engagement. Then I worked with them to map their values around writing, social justice, and curriculum. And I did that through initial interviews, attending a lot of their faculty meetings, then running a faculty meeting discussion, sending out a survey to follow up on it, going back to additional faculty meetings for some feedback. So a lot of really working with that whole community. And then we collaborated on an intervention together from there. I think you could do a lot more with step 4 if you weren't just a dissertator about to leave the campus, but that's what I did as my step 4. So to just kind of summarize really quickly what I'm bringing from community engagement and how that really affected the way I was looking at this department. Oh, and I didn't mention, this was the Civil and Environmental Engineering department on my campus. And so these are terms from community engagement that I really use to help me do this work. And it's so cool presenting alongside Tiffany today. The first one's from her, Rhetoric of Respect. I especially focused on this right as I was reaching out to departments initially, but then throughout the whole process. And so for me, Rhetoric of Respect meant I was respecting the expertise and the investment of faculty. I think we think about the expertise of faculty in WAC, but I also really respected the idea that they chose to work with me and they were just as invested in this as me, both in writing and also the social justice aspect. I kind of went in assuming that they cared about it, and that helped us lead towards greater results, I think, going in with that respect and assumption of us all working together well. Then the term entering the community, you see this just a lot throughout community engagement. But for me, this meant really mindfully entering into the space of the department. I think at first I was like, well, this is another academic department. I won't have to be as careful as if it was a community off campus like people usually do, but this really helped me think through carefully entering in stages in the department. So I didn't just go in and say, I want to do all these things right away, day one. I listened to what they were saying about best places for me to interact with faculty. And I started out with a smaller group and then expanded from there. So kind of trusting that you don't have to do it all at once was really helpful, and letting them tell me how to enter the community. And I'm continuing to enter into more spaces even as I'm now kind of done collecting data. And then the most practical part, community values mapping. So this is more a method that people use in community engagement, but it's a process of developing a representation of the values for the community. You'll see this, like some of where I saw this happen was farming communities talking about values of who cares about more water or dirt or whatever different things they cared about most in a region, and why maybe they cared more about the water at one place and someone else cared more about dust moving, or I don't know, I'm not a farm person, but they mapped that all out. So I used a similar method of like working with the community to map out their values, this time about writing, social justice, and curriculum. And then community listening. This is from Rachel Jackson. So for her, she was working with the Kiowa Nation when she wrote up about this term. And it's a very specific type of listening, I think. So like I said, they're listening as an equal partner in the meaning making. So you're not there as a passive listener, just waiting to hear maybe the responses you're expecting people to say. You're not there, or I guess you're not there listening, like waiting already to hear what you think they will say. You're also not just completely letting them go wherever they want with the conversation. I think this is very important. Some people were wondering, they're like, well, what if you want to talk about social justice, but then they don't bring it up in conversations? This type of listening, that wasn't going to happen because I was an active equal partner in the conversation. So I was using that rhetoric of respect. I was respecting their expertise and their investment, but I also would bring in, oh, and how does that relate to social justice issues in your department or in your field? Things like that. So I was helping them draw connections. I was asking very specific questions to draw further into the aspects that would lead us towards what we talked about wanting to do as a group. So that term really helped me think through those conversations. Okay, now finally, chapter 4, a little bit more. So I just wanted to share, this is kind of some big ideas I got that I think would be helpful to other people out of each of the different parts of gathering data from them. So the initial meetings that I went to, interviews that I conducted, what I learned, my goal is to find out where writing is done in the department. And that's, again, kind of that respecting that they were invested. I assumed that writing was being done. And so I went in already asking, oh, where do you do writing, instead of does writing happen, things like that. I asked about the current curricular initiatives and the projects that they were doing towards diversity, equity, inclusion in their group. So again, with both of those, assuming they're already doing some great work and showing that I was invested in learning about that, even if it wasn't directly related to what we were doing, really gave me a lot of better insight into their department. And then what I was sharing, so that I started seeing that already, but I shared my interest in investment. I gained a lot of allies. I started sharing similarities that I saw between different projects that they were doing, and maybe how that related to writing in a classroom activity that, oh, I didn't know so-and-so did that writing, that relates to my bigger project over here. And I started questioning areas that I could help them maybe continue to improve upon with all of that. Then with values mapping, I think the faculty learned a lot from one another's expertise. I saw they were very respectful of one another when we started, especially in the group discussions, where some of them had more professional experience, some had more academic experience, some had been in the department longer. So they really learned from one another in our discussions well, and supported each other. And really, when someone shared a value, they would like build off of that well. And they were able to really articulate and refine their ideas through discussion. Then I have 2 examples here, what my facilitation really looked like with that. So one more specific related to writing. They talked a lot about concise language. And I was like, okay, well, concise language, I know from my writing background, is sometimes hard. What do you know to cut? How do you talk about that? So I asked, what would you cut? What are you trying to look for when it's more concise? And me asking that question helped them to really narrow it down and say, in a final thing about their values around writing, that they want precise language that avoids vague descriptors in favor of specifics. So not a tall building, but how tall, things like that. And then another thing I showed, they had a big interest in environmental justice. They really cared about writing and problem solving. So this led us to discussing how to bring that all together, and the idea that they could write up about creative solutions for environmental issues, drawing from community input, and how that could become writing projects. And that became kind of, I summarized, but a value that they shared with their values. And then we created a shared rubric together, was their big intervention they wanted to do. So I'll go through this kind of quickly, but basically they decided this would have the greatest impact for their group, and they decided on it really quickly together. I think based on looking at these values, they're like, well, we want to assess for this now. So I was like, cool, that's a great big impact. I could do a couple smaller projects, or I could do a bigger project. So this was the bigger intervention we decided on together. I worked together with the faculty to review past ones. And then basically what I created was rubric criteria that they could select from based on those values. And I had to design 2 examples I saw from all what they were sending me. They sometimes grade shorter assignments holistically, longer assignments by what's in your intro, what's in your methods, things like that, by sections. So I gave them 2 examples of how to do that. And they shared that they plan to use this to more quickly assess writing and therefore assign it more often. And they also really liked that this allowed them to assess for social justice issues, that they had language to do that. And it helped them focus on writing skills for the field over just standard academic English or grammar. And so just to kind of end some of what worked well for me throughout this process, I learned trusting the faculty to be invested in both writing and social justice. Me having that trust in them really led us to be able to do the work that we did. Working alongside the faculty, so respecting their expertise while also sharing mine, worked really well. I think at some points I had to stand back a little bit. Sometimes I came forward a little bit more, but I think balancing that and like drawing from these community engaged discussions I was reading about in different articles really helped me frame how to do that. And then also entering the department in stages. I actually did a lot of my work more with one half of the department and then started going to the other half. And at first I was like, oh, but I wanted to work with a whole department. That's what my plan was, but it was my greater partners were in that half of the department, and knowing that this could be a gradual process and that it would grow bigger because it had that strong foundation working with the people who were more invested really helped the project become what it was. Cool, so that's all I have. Like I said, we can do questions at the end, but I'm also, you can reach out to me by email, and I have this as a link. I think you can get it through Who But anyways, but I always put a tiny URL for my presentations, so you can check it out whenever after this.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm hoping that it's not too loud here. I'm actually sitting on the floor of the National Theatre on the south bank of the Thames in England right now. So I'm here visiting my husband's family for the first time since the pandemic. And this is probably the oddest space I've ever done a conference from. But thank you so much for having me, Emily. I think your presentation was wonderful. And that was also slightly surreal to see me referenced in your presentation. So I was at the beginning of it, I was like, oh, this looks so cool. And then I see my name, and of course it is. So this is wonderful. So thank you for pulling up my presentation. I guess I will just ask you to move a slide, to the next one when I need you to. So this presentation is more practical application based on the Writing Across the College program that I run. I'm Tiffany Ralscope. I direct the Writing Across the College program at Salt Lake Community College in Salt Lake City, Utah. Been doing it for 9 years. I'm entering my 10th year, which will be my last year directing it, and then it will turn over to somebody else. This presentation is called No Resting on Laurels, because the community writing, not the community, oh my gosh, the community writing center is something I did some time ago. The Writing Across the College program has been fairly successful. Go ahead and go back, stick on that slide right there. Thank you. Yeah, so let me just give you a little bit of background. That one's perfect right there. So I took a community literacy approach to developing the WAC program at Salt Lake Community College. And similar to some of the things that Emily just talked about with learning about the space itself and learning what the space itself needed before implementing any type of programming, it evolved into two main arms of programming. So we have writing in the classroom, which has some student support that does not overlap with support that the Student Writing and Reading Center provides, that does not overlap with other student affairs programming. It mostly is based on like assessment policy, expectations, and so on. And then writing in the classroom also involves a bunch of support for faculty, a whole bunch of workshops, a whole bunch of individualized and small group support. And then finally, our writing intensive program that we got launched a few years ago, and it has a load component to encourage faculty to do it in a sustainable manner. Then the Professional Writing Center, what that does is that supports all other writers at the college. So that would be staff members, faculty members, administrators. And so this is helping them, supporting them with the writing that they do in the workplace. And this ranges from supporting faculty on their professional portfolios, which is their evaluative, it's the main artifact of evaluation in the tenure and promotion process. Also It involves individual consultation on any type of writing, and it involves workshops, a whole bunch of workshops, particularly for staff members. And one thing that we launched recently was it's essentially a desk manual, so a set of instructions for work tasks. It's a wiki that we've created for all staff. So all staff can create their instructions for the various things that they do. They can go in and take stuff from each other and keep developing that resource so that when new people come in, it will help them learn how to do the work that they need to do, but also be able to tweak it to their own particular circumstances. So that's kind of writing across the college. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so last year, not this most recent last year, but the year before, was a very good year for the WAC program. We had 3 equity-focused workshops with high participation. These were workshops. The first one was on working well with English language learning students. The second one was working well with students with invisible disabilities. And the third one was one on teaching towards linguistic justice. And so these were, it was 3 courses, and then groups came together and they took all 3 courses, and we had developed basically learning communities out of those. So those were those 2 successful learning communities. We had exponential growth of our writing intensive program that was sort of beyond my wildest dreams. But the way that we were focusing it was trying to target faculty who were already using writing intensive pedagogies, but were not receiving institutional support or credit for that. We also passed an anti-racist written communication college-wide student learning outcome. And I had built a relationship with our institutional marketing department and received permission to promote our WAC opportunities directly through them, as opposed to having to go through faculty development, which had started out really well, but with a new director that came in, we were getting less press. I produced 1 publication and received 2 national awards for the program. So it was really great. And I was very excited going into 2022, 2023, but go ahead and go to the next slide. In the fall of 2020, there was nothing but crickets. It was so quiet. So from August through October, not a single faculty member, adjunct or full-time, signed up for a single WAC workshop. So that was a little disappointing. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So to figure out what was going on. So instead of saying, oh, well, what's wrong with the faculty? I just wanted to figure out what was going on. So I did a study of basically 2-year college faculty participation motivation regarding their professional development with basically WAC programming. So what I did is I surveyed 200 faculty who were randomly selected based on a proportional distribution across departments that included at least 1 written communication learning outcome in their degree programs. So I combed through all of the degree programs, all of our Associates of Science and Associate of Arts degree programs. And if any of them had at least 1 outcome that was within our written communication or effective communication student learning outcome, I included them. I got set up a full-time faculty to adjunct faculty ratio of 1 to 3, because that's basically what our ratio is. And I wanted to look at 5 areas. So satisfaction with student writing, the awareness of WAC programming, preferred methods of notification about workshops and about resources, factors discouraging participation, factors encouraging participation. And then I invited people to a focus group. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So our response rate was 12.5%, which is not too bad. But what was a problem is that we had 28% of those who responded were not eligible to respond, because I had to pull out faculty who either served on our Writing Across the College Advisory Board or our Writing Intensive Designation Committee. And that's literally only about 6 people out of hundreds of faculty. But of the people who responded, more than a quarter were those faculty. And I myself received a randomly distributed survey. So that didn't work very well. So that was a little frustrating. But of those that responded, we had a pretty good spread, about 40% adjunct, a half full-time faculty. And we have administrators who teach some courses, and that was a smaller amount. And then we had the spread across our 5 different areas. As you can see, we got none from humanities. So that was another faulty part of this research. But other than that, a fairly decent spread. So here's who responded. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So this was the first finding that I thought was kind of interesting. It was that faculty are generally satisfied with student writing. I mean, adjunct faculty somewhat less so than full-time faculty. Our administrators were 100% somewhat satisfied. So it could be somewhat satisfied or extremely satisfied. But so you've got, pretty good satisfaction with student writing, which would lead me to believe that writing across the college workshops are not necessarily at the top of their concerns. And so I have to take that into consideration as I'm figuring out how to promote and what to provide. So I was surprised by this because we hear so much anecdotal information. I'm sure you do as well as I do about, you start talking about what you do and, oh, our students, write terribly, but really they're generally kind of satisfied with our students. So, okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. So this was another question. How aware of WAC programming are our faculty? And I was really surprised with this one that 78% of our full-time faculty are aware of WAC programming. Adjunct faculty a little bit less, but still that's a pretty high number, which tells me that I've become obnoxious enough to get myself in different spaces and people have heard of our programming. And so that's not really the problem. It's not the case that I'm just not getting the word out. It's the case that maybe I'm getting the word out and they don't want it. Maybe I'm getting the word out and I'm not doing it right. But generally, people know about WAC. And so that's a success, but also a concern because of what I just said. So, okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is how do people want to be notified about opportunities. And we have 2 main systems. We have email, so an email blast, or we have our college-wide e-newsletter called SLCC Today. And the college is pushing us hard to do everything through SLCC Today, through that e-newsletter. But what you find here, pretty interesting, is that adjunct faculty have no interest in SLCC Today. They only want to hear about it through email. Full-time faculty, by and large, only want to get things through email. And admins apparently prefer SLCC Today. I don't know why, but they do. And then it's pretty much across the board with the different areas that there's a pretty significant preference for email. And I think this just speaks to the different ways that administrations and our internal communication systems keep trying to drive us away from email to more potentially efficient ways of sharing information. But faculty are still pretty much stuck on email. And I know I am. I'd much prefer to get something through email. Perhaps as younger generations come through, perhaps it will be different, but we're still kind of stuck on email. And the reason this is significant is because I had received permission to work with institutional marketing, but only through the e-newsletter, not through email. So I have no rights to send out email blasts to faculty. Faculty development can do that, but I cannot. And so even though I thought I'd made this, excellent strides in developing awareness by getting connections made with institutional marketing, they were not working at all. And I needed to have access to email. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. So this slide talks about what I found that discourages faculty from participating in WAC programming. And the blue columns are basically the role, and then the white columns are the area. And the things that were significant to me here was just how burned out people are. So if you look at the full-time one, so burnout was 67%. I apologize for that extra percentage symbol there. So 67% of full-time faculty are burned out. No surprise, the first year, that's sort of a generally normal year after the pandemic, and we're suddenly being expected to just be back to normal and do all of this, different work to get our students caught up, and our students are burnt out. We're dealing with our mental illness and mental health issues with our students, on ourselves, on our own families. If you look particularly at the SME as science, math and engineering, 86% are burned out. They're not interested. They don't want to do anything else. With our adjunct faculty are just not available at the times that the workshops were being offered. Full-time faculty also, timing and availability were huge issues. Luckily, questions of value, whether or not it was valuable, was fairly low except for administrators. So our administrators with faculty roles, about half of them didn't necessarily see the value in some of the WAC programming, which is fine. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. And this is what might encourage faculty to participate in WAC programming. So let me see what we've got here. So seeing the value is important for administrators and timing. And the administrators was pretty split all the way through. Sorry, I got a sneeze. Very significant in the adjunct faculty column was the freedom to do it on their own time, which makes sense. Adjunct faculty wanted additional money, and some wanted to do it with their own department. Full-time faculty was a less clear. They wanted reassigned time, which lines up very well with the burnout. But those also timing, it's less clear. They want additional money. Some want to do it with a department, some didn't want to do the department. So it's not incredibly clear. So what, could you look at the next slide? I think the next slide is, yeah, okay. So the new approaches that I decided to take was, for the time being, I was just going to focus on adjunct faculty. I was just going to leave full-time faculty alone. I was just saying, okay, you're burnt out. You're not sure what would encourage you. You're not going to get reassigned time. Our adjunct faculty do receive an hourly stipend to take this training. So I just was like, let's just put it all on adjunct faculty right now to provide them with some opportunities to earn some more money, but making sure to do it fully open enrollment and self-paced. So I'm jumping over number 2. So what I did is, instead of scheduling any workshops at all whatsoever, completely got rid of that. And then everything was self-paced. So it's all built into a Canvas shell, and people can enroll, they can do it on their own time. Some people do the workshops in an afternoon, and some people take a month to do them. I was able to work with institutional marketing and only use email. I promised them I would not ask them to send out more than 2 emails per semester, and they've been wonderful. And so I've been able to use the giant email blasts. I don't send them out. I put them together. I give them to institutional marketing, and then they format them and send them together. Also, I've been offering things during winter holiday, and then at the start of the term and the midterm, and between the spring and summer semesters. These are times that adjunct faculty are not earning any income, and that has seen a big impact. And then I've been working with department chairs to see if any of them are interested to do whole department trainings, whole department workshops, and I haven't had much success with that yet. Again, I just think people are just fried right now. And so go ahead and go to the next slide. I think the next slide just says success. Yes. So it has been pretty pleasing to see the not complete turnaround, but a significant change in the spring semester. Many more adjunct faculty signed up for many more workshops. And importantly, they finished them. So a lot of people might sign up, but then not finish. But they finished them. And one of the things that I have found with the programming, the development programming that our WAC program offers, is if I can get an adjunct faculty member into one course, then I think it's something like 88 to 90% come back for another one. So I just got to get them into that first one, and then they'll keep coming back for more. And so it's been quite successful. And moving into the summer, I've been trying to manage it here while I've been in England, working with faculty and trying to get them registered and set up. So it is working. And so this is just a case of, it felt really bad in the fall because I felt like we were on such a high after last year. And then just a great reality check. Just be like, you can be on top of the world, and then all of a sudden nobody's going to want to be involved. And but taking a step back and looking at, okay, what's going on here, and what do people want, and then shifting things up a little bit has made a difference. I think you can go to the next slide. I think that might be it though. That is the last slide. Okay, thank you very much.
You have the clicker. Or is it working? No. If I just do it like that. Like that. Okay. Yeah, sure. Yep. Works. Okay. Great. So hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Lacey Wooten. I'm at American University. I'm currently the WPA in the Writing Studies program for about 2 more weeks, not that I'm counting. And then I'll be back to teaching college writing again full time. I'm going to be talking about deep accountability, motivating obligations, and disciplinary writing instruction. And this talk is drawn from my dissertation study on emotional labor in disciplinary writing instruction. So I developed my theory of deep accountability through this study. Much of my work with emotional labor was grounded in Arlie Russell Hochschild's theories of emotional labor as commodified and as having strong effects, including alienation, on employees. One of her study findings was that her participants, who were flight attendants and bill collectors, engaged in deep acting as part of their emotional labor. They had so internalized the expectations for emotional management and expression that this labor came almost automatically to them. In my studies, the participants who were academics weren't subject to such clear expectations for emotional labor. In fact, they expressed confusion, frustration, and even alienation with unclear and inconsistent personnel requirements, especially as those applied to their teaching and to disciplinary writing instruction. So in that personnel accountability vacuum, they constructed their own accountability structures, expectations for themselves and their teaching that arose from the professional identity, values, and obligations. There were no explicit or perhaps even actual accountability mechanisms from their colleagues, their discipline or profession, or their students, yet they still felt strongly obligated and accountable to all these groups, as I will discuss. However, they also felt that they lacked sufficient knowledge of writing pedagogy to effectively support student writing development. And so they employed emotional labor, their instinctive sense of how to motivate, criticize, engage, and teach students. So professionalism is key to deep accountability. I worked with 2 definitions of professionalism in this study. The first is from Scott, and it comes from his distinction between bureaucrats and professionals. His definition of professional foregrounds autonomy, a state of not being managed, in contrast to bureaucrats who he sees as being managed. By the way, he puts first-year writing people under the category of bureaucrats, not professionals, which I kind of take issue with. Bledstein's definition, which comes from his book on professionalism, class, and higher education, also highlights autonomy, but it emphasizes an ethic of service, an obligation to a client's interest. So taken together, these 2 definitions point to a state in which one isn't subject to a high degree of direct management, but one is also subject to a set of professional ethics that can involve obligations to others. So why does deep accountability matter? For a few reasons, I think. First, the obligations that I'll describe here arise from and result in interpersonal relationships, in human and humane connections that can be a site of recovery within institutional structures that emphasize austerity, metrics, etc. In other words, in a corporatized, quantified higher education landscape, which is perhaps going to be exacerbated by the rise of ChatGPT and its ilk, the connections we forge with students matter more than ever. At the same time, though, this landscape leads to more possibilities for exploitation as we struggle with austerity measures, contingency, and increased institutional demands, as people like Scott, Stenberg, Gill, and others have described. Simply put, if we care more, we might also be more vulnerable to exploitation. Deep accountability can also matter to those who work in professional development. As Tiffany was just talking about, WAC faculty resistance and motivation have been topics of study and discussion for many years now. And so I think this study provides some additional insights into these dynamics. So just to quickly summarize this study, it was an institutional ethnography of emotional labor in disciplinary writing instruction. I had 3 focus groups with a total of 15 participants. I also interviewed 3 more participants 3 times over the course of fall 2020. All participants taught what we call at AU W2 classes, which are required writing intensive classes in their disciplines. And because this was an IE study, I also analyzed a variety of institutional texts, including personnel policies, W2 curricular requirements, syllabi and assignments, and student papers with feedback. So participants described 3 areas of accountability. They had obligations to colleagues, to their profession or discipline, and to their students. For their obligations to colleagues, they felt obligated to those who would teach their students next. Again, no official accountability structure existed, but they still felt accountable. For example, Miriam, who's an art history professor, said, sometimes a student will have done a lower level course with me, and then they'll go on to do a more upper level course with another colleague. And I do feel like, I hope they're okay. I hope I've taught them all right on the lower level stuff before they go on to the higher level. Some participants, though, also spoke quite critically of colleagues who they felt weren't meeting their obligations in return. It was a version of, I'm doing the hard work of teaching students to write, but my colleagues aren't doing their part. Tim, a history professor, said, and so many of the professors focus on content rather than method. And so once students arrive in the writing intensive, they have no idea what to do. These participants believed that faculty were obligated to be accountable to each other in supporting students and their writing. Participants also felt accountable to their discipline or their profession with an obligation to prepare students in the disciplinary conventions or for their jobs. Here too, there was no actual accountability. No one was keeping track of whether Carl was teaching students the conventions of chemistry writing, but he acted as though someone was. He said, and then they had to put that data into the context of a results and discussion section, which is typical. So when I write a research paper, there's a results and discussion section. So it's a fairly standard thing we have to write. Note the we here, where we can also see there's an obligation to bring students into the common discourse of the discipline. Stephen, who taught marketing, pointed to the frequent complaints about young people in writing. I do recognize the importance because anytime we talk to employers, people talk about how poor the writing skills are for most college students coming out these days, and especially in the business world. So I recognize that there's a deficiency there. I'm not going to be able to solve it all in my one class, but it's certainly something that's worth addressing. Putting aside the fact that these type of complaints have a long history, Stephen's sense of obligation was real. He saw it as his duty. Participants most strongly expressed feelings of obligation and accountability was towards their students. They wanted to see them develop as writers and succeed in their future. Stephen expressed this sense of obligation in a fairly material way. I feel some personal accountability to students. They're paying a lot, and I know some people hate the term, referring to our students as our clients or our customers, but again, they're paying a lot of money for this. And my ultimate goal in a professional-based field is to set them up for success in their future career. So while Stephen's words might seem to reinforce a crass customer service mentality, he is correct that AU is a very expensive school, and it's realistic to want to support students in their career success. He felt he was really looking out for them through this obligation. Miriam, the art history professor, expressed a similar sense of accountability to students in broader and more humanistic terms. Despite any of the requirements or anything, I genuinely want these students to learn and understand this, that, and the other, not even for their course or for their degree, but like them as human beings. Many participants communicated a sense of care for their students' intellectual development, but also for their personal well-being. They recognized that students found writing stressful, and they tried to mitigate that stress, often via emotional labor. So these feelings of accountability and obligation were intertwined with participants' sense of themselves as professionals. Sam, a government professor, put it this way, but I'm also a teacher because I'm interested in doing a good job for my students and with my students. Sam directly linked his professional identity as a teacher with supporting students. Stephen even explicitly linked professional identity with a personal constructed sense of accountability when he said, I think you have to have that internal personal accountability to do the right thing. This was in the context of talking about how there were no institutional explicit requirements for this labor. He felt that as professionals, they needed to do the right thing for their students. So that accountability for professionals doesn't necessarily come from external requirements or structures. It's an internal mechanism. So these study findings have implications for disciplinary faculty, labor advocates, and faculty developers. These disciplinary faculty experienced feelings of deep accountability and obligation, but they also felt that they didn't have the pedagogical knowledge to effectively teach writing. So they turned to what they did know, how to work with students on an interpersonal basis. They used a variety of forms of emotional labor to manage students and their own emotions as a central component of their writing instruction. This kind of labor, though, is labor intensive with a lot of one-on-one interaction. And so study participants were often exceeding what the institution explicitly asked of them and rewarded them for. Of course, because the institutional personnel policies were vague and contradictory anyways, it became even more likely that faculty would do more than what was expected, more than they were officially accountable for. Participants complained that their labor was unrecognized and unrewarded. I'm sure you can't imagine faculty complaining about anything like that. However, this emotional labor also reinforced their human and humane connections with students. Participants cared about their students. They did what they needed to do to help them succeed and grow. And as I've said, I think these connections matter in our current academic environments. And this labor, these obligations, these connections, the emotional labor, they were not perceived as lesser or beneath them. The participants saw them as part of their professional identity and values. This excess labor, though, I think should be a concern for labor advocates. These participants are doing more labor than they were compensated for, and they're doing it in part because of a lack of institutional support. Unclear personnel structures are also cause for concern. Vague, contradictory, or missing personnel policies create gaps for exploitation. Moreover, as Gill notes, professionals often fill those gaps by holding themselves to stricter accountability than institutions do, thus participating in their own exploitation. It's a tricky problem, though, because filling those gaps with institutional policies can lead to increased use of metrics. I don't know that any faculty would want their emotional and relational labor to be accounted for in quantifiable terms. For example, multiple participants in my study felt that student evaluations, which our institution are almost completely numeric, were detrimental to their teaching and to their relationships with students. So we wouldn't want to go down that route out either. All of these concerns, I think, connect to issues that faculty developers might consider. My study shows that deep accountability and the specific areas of obligation can be affordances, both as motivators and as sources of pedagogical strategies. I think that emotional labor actually can be used as a pedagogical strategy. There are also opportunities for exploitation, and faculty developers would not want to contribute to that. And I think, as Tiffany kind of suggested in her study, of course, as we just saw, there's also the issue of time burdens in professional development. That is just one more time obligation on top of many others. But I think there could be an opportunity to help disciplinary faculty recognize and work with their obligations and with their emotional labor in order to deploy them deliberately and strategically. So I want to close with some questions that I hope we can consider a bit when we open the floor for discussion. How can faculty developers support these forms of intrinsic motivation while avoiding labor exploitation? What are the implications of this study for groups especially vulnerable to excess labor and exploitation, such as contingent faculty, faculty from traditionally marginalized or oppressed populations? And are there ways for disciplinary faculty to demand recognition for this labor that would reward it without creating one more reductive metric? So that's it. Thank you very much. I'm going to open up for questions, and we have a mic here so the people on the app can hear us too.
I'm wondering whether any of you have used WAC as, a pitch for labor saving for faculty. I've been experimenting with this lately, where the most popular email I ever send is the one right at the end of the semester where I say, don't write on those final drafts. They're final drafts. Just grade them with your rubric that you should have now, because they're not going to read it. And I get all these emails back. Thank you for the reminder. And then other ways I sort of pitch WAC as, all right, you might assign less writing, but support it more. And different, I was wondering if anyone else has come up with other ways you're pitching WAC as a labor saving device.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. When I've told faculty that you don't have to mark sentence level stuff on every single page, like do it on one paragraph, it's like, it's incredible to them. It's this huge epiphany. But really quickly, I want to recommend, if you're not familiar with the book Elements of Teaching Writing, which is a terrific little book, and it's actually the intended audience are disciplinary faculty. And if nothing else, there is a section on giving feedback, and their approach to giving feedback is one I actually converted to myself. It's really effective, and it also saves me a lot of time. Basically what they say is write your end comments first and then go back and put comments in the margin, because I'm one of those people who just reacts to everything in the margins, and this stopped me from doing that. So it's better for students too, right? It's much better for them, and it's faster. But yeah, the book is called Elements of Teaching Writing. It's Gottschalk and Horchage. I can't even say the second name correctly, but it's great. And so I would strongly recommend that as a possible resource.
Well, I think the way that I've approached it, I think is more conceptual. As the questioner asked the question, I like your approach to it, to giving a very concrete application for this, and I'm going to take that from you because that's brilliant. The one thing I have noticed is that as we've been rolling out our writing intensive curriculum, and the application process and the approval process, is just how much work people are doing in different disciplines that is frankly unnecessary. And when I explained to them, well, yes, this is already, completely writing intensive, but it's really too much, then that allows them to cut some of it down and focus. But on the other hand, some other faculty look at it and they're like, well, if we're going to have writing intensive classes, then I'm just not going to do any writing in my classes. So you never quite know how the response is going to be. But I love that idea of using WAC as a time saver, as a labor saver. That's brilliant.
So I got a comment, and then I have a question for you, Tiffany. This is Alex from Mesa, Arizona. Good to see you. So I think it's a great question about how we approach that with faculty. I think what I've noticed is that faculty across the disciplines, once we have a conversation about the different ways to use writing, so not necessarily writing to assess, but now writing to perhaps just giving students an opportunity to learn the material, right? And in that sense, the stakes are not as high. And so when they're able to see like, oh, wait a minute, yeah, you're right. In this particular piece of writing, I don't even need any comments because it was simply a space for them to talk about and make sense of their learning. And when they hear that, it's almost a burden off of them, right? And now they can truly target, if there's a high stakes writing assignment, now we can just target that specifically. And so I think that has been a way for Stacy and I to address that without actually calling it out. So do you want to add anything to that? I was just putting you on the spot on there. Gary?
Well, again, so just as far as marketing, WAC is definitely has worked to, I mean, this idea of opening up and using it to be accessible, making your discipline accessible to your students. And all the low stakes, I think, again, there is that surprise that low stakes writing is a thing. You don't have to touch everything. You don't have to read everything. You can have your students read, share, but I think that's, again, the whole labor saving, which I love that.
This is a lot of work for the faculty. And so we're keeping this enrollment cap on these classes. And yet to the faculty, no, this will make your work easier doing that.
I was going to add on to what you were saying. I think that a lot of WAC practices are designed for labor saving because a lot of faculty don't think about their assignment practices, the kind of assignments they write, the expectations they have for their students, the kind of assessments they do. And so, working with threshold concepts is one way to think through that, as, what's important and why is it important to you, and what are the things that are less important to you, and how can you focus on those that are important. I think it's also, there's a scenario I use in my WAC training every time I do a training, which is from Chris Anson's case study book. Steve is a faculty member, okay, in a department, I think political science or something, where he's asking his students to write about utopias. And he assigns this assignment. It's the first week of class, and he's run out of, it's 3 weeks later, he still hasn't given his papers back. He's got an article due the next day, blah, 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 right? And I asked my colleagues when I have them in the group, I said, so how would you deal with this situation, first of all? And then second of all, how would you avoid this situation, right? And it's about, not all writing has to be formal writing, as we said. Not all writing needs to be graded in the same way. In fact, not all writing needs to be graded. And then furthermore, once you decide on how you want to grade, you need to make sure you've got assessment criteria, so the student expectations. So there's just all of these elements of WAC are, I think, all about labor saving practices.
Yeah, to add to this, I think that it's meant to be writing intensive for the students, not the professors. And we forget that. So I want to, emphasize what you've all said, like, yes, and add the peer process, because that's another sneaky way, that I've used. So I give my students, I have a poster. Go look at it. On ungrading the writing process. And it really echoes what you're all saying. To me, a grade isn't really even necessary. I mean, it's part of what my college does, so I do it at the end. So the process and the learning are the focus. So it's about learning. And so I give out the assignment, I collect it, they get their points, you did it, done. I give it out again with some guidelines so that they can now think more deeply. Then they write another draft. Then they meet with their peers. So I haven't even graded. I haven't even, as they're working with their peers, I'm walking around, I'm seeing, it is labor. It's a shift in labor for us, right? We are working harder actually in some ways, but philosophically, And it's the paradigm, it's really understanding it and enacting it through what we're doing and through what we're asking our students to do. So no busy work, everything is meaningful, right? And so then they do some work with their peers. Just seeing somebody else's work makes all the difference. Giving feedback to a peer, getting feedback from a peer. Then they write their third draft. That draft I look at. See, by then they've done so much work. I'm not writing the same thing to everyone, in that first one, that first week that then I'm drowning. It's later in the semester. I know them, they know me, they've gone through a process. I give them real feedback. No grade, right? I've learned that a grade is an end of a conversation. So no grade, just feedback. Then they write their final draft at the end of the semester. This is a semester-long thing. And then they get a grade. They don't need a comment. They've had the comments, they've had the learning, and at the end it's a grade. And I have to tell you that ever since I switched to this model, they do so much better. The quality of their work has increased. The relationships in the classroom are better. They think more about the assignment because they're not just asking me, is this good? Did I do this? It's like they own it. So I don't know. Sorry for my long-winded, but I'm a big proponent of this.
So definitely anyone online, if you want to go to the Q&A and add any other questions, that's a great spot to do it, or anyone in the room too, if that's just more comfortable for you. But this is for Tiffany. Can you clarify the structure of your course, given it's self-paced? I assume it's all online via an LMS or a video.
Sorry, I was having a hard time unmuting. Yes, it's on the courses. All the courses that I offer are all built into our Canvas LMS. They tend to be between 8 to 10 different modules. Most of them have videos that go with them and then reflective pieces. I have another one that's slightly different structure. It's about transparent assignment design, which is a series of assignments in which faculty revise one of their assignments, or 2 or 3, however many they want. They each come with, there's a certain number of hours that are assigned to each of them that our adjunct faculty will get compensated for them. So the adjunct faculty come in and register through our registration system. Once they're approved by their department chairs or division chairs, they go and complete the course. At the end of each course, there's an informal conversation with me that we just schedule around their time, and that can range from 10 minutes to a half an hour, depending on how long they want to talk. I think that that's important, particularly for our adjunct faculty, to make sure that they are making a connection with somebody at the college. And then once they're done, I go in and mark them done, and then they are paid. And so they start and stop at any time that they want.
So Tiffany, I have a question for you, and I think Emily, this might relate to your presentation as well. I was really intrigued by your survey to try to get a better sense of why faculty perhaps were not coming in that fall semester. And I wondered, do you have any sense of how faculty in your institutions conceptualize social justice issues? And I asked that question because in the WAC program that we're trying to start over in our Maricopa Community College District, we have been very careful to toe this line between letting people know that a lot of this work is embedded within our values of egalitarianism and social justice. But at the same time, we've also understood that that entry point of social justice doesn't resonate with all faculty at all programs. So I'm just wondering if in your research or in the survey, you got, or anecdotally, if you got to have a sense of that conceptualization.
Emily, do you want to respond to that first, and then I will?
I'll throw it to you. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm definitely on a campus. I'm really lucky where we can use the word social justice even. I've been on a campus before where you couldn't, so I understand that struggle. But for my school, it's, you know, UW is so big. Each college does their own thing, each department does their own thing, but almost all programs have some sort of diversity, equity, inclusion group occurring. And so that's where a lot of my project, that's like the respect that they do care about this. I went in and I said, well, I want to work with you on writing and social justice, but you tell me, what does social justice look like in your discipline? What are the issues you're working on right now? What work are you already doing? And so when I initially reached out to a lot of different departments, all of the people I at least talked to definitely were like, well, yeah, that's important, but here's where we're at with it in our department. You know, in like one department, they were very much, we have almost no females in, it was computer science. We have almost no females in computer science. And we know that's an issue we should probably have addressed before, but it's still an issue. And so that's where we're at. And that's our biggest issue that we're still dealing with. We have greater racial diversity, but they're still mostly male. So I think that was what really worked with my model, is like talking to them and making a conversation of what is important in your field. And then like, how can I work with you on that through talking about writing and greater how writing fits into your curriculum. But for me, at least on my campus, everyone did care about that and was able to share, here are things we're doing. This is what's important. This is why we're still struggling with it. So I think it does differ between departments, especially in a bigger school, but everyone is aware of it. And I think it really helps to not just go in, and especially like the group I'm with, they've done so much work, but they've never heard the term linguistic justice before. And I think if I went in and immediately was like, you need to do linguistic justice, here's what it is, they would have been like on the defense, like, what is that? Is that important for us? We're not sure. But because I first asked, what is important for you? What are you working through? And then I brought up, oh, and you know, linguistic justice can help in this way towards some of that. It became more of a conversation and more respect on both sides. And we were able to both share our expertise that way. Yeah. Tiffany, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, a couple things. So I'd say approximately about three years ago, the Salt Lake Community College became very invested in Jedi work. And so all the attention and all the money was going towards development within Jedi frameworks. And I already had our English language learning, working well with English language learner students. And I had our writing with invisible disabilities workshop, and then a couple others that were more generalized, just like developing successful student writers. And I don't know if you're familiar with like nonprofit development, but it's called, you know, chasing the money or chasing the grant. And I think that I developed the teaching towards linguistic justice course in that, and kind of within that framework. You know, that, okay, you know, this is what's getting attention right now. And I think it's very important. And it's actually, my background is more in linguistics than like literature and that kind of stuff. And so it was something I wanted to do, but I can tell that in the uptake of the different courses, that course is not nearly as appealing to people. It seems like it's just a little bit too far from sort of the norm of what people are ready to do. And then over the course of 22, 23 last year, when I did this study, I'm really getting a sense of some burnout with kind of the, everything has to be within social justice, with the idea of social justice being very narrowly defined within essentially like racial and ethnic diversity, as opposed to some gender diversity, not so much. Definitely LGBTQ plus issues is very big at our college, but issues of ability diversity, gender diversity, class diversity, it's not so pronounced at our college. And so I really love what Emily said. You go in there and say, okay, what is your vision of this? To me, I think I I didn't follow my own rules basically, and I think I stepped too far in terms of too far for the comfort of my colleagues. Not that that's bad, because if we stick with their comfort all the time, we're never going to get anywhere. But the uptake of that one has not been nearly as much.
Yeah, do we have maybe time for one more question? And have a last. Nothing else in the chat? If not, we can just go ahead and end.
Thank you all so much for coming. We really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you so much.